this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I've had quite a few people on my orchid channel, which is the same channel effectively, asking about my bonsai and how they're doing, because I filmed quite a bit about them for the first time this year in the spring. My channel was always supposed to be Roger's Orchids Plus, and the plus was the bonsai bit. But you know, this is a very slow process growing bonsai. You know, I mean, you can spend 50 years developing a tree and it's still not ready. So it's a very, very slow progress. So there's not a lot to film. Not a lot happens that quickly. But starting from the spring pruning and repotting processes, this is like a midsummer update. And on this one, this is just a look. I'm not touching the tree. Some of the others I will give them a summer trim while I'm at it. But just to go over this, this is a collected Scots pine. It's got a nickname of Lightning Strike because of the massive shari down the centre of the tree, which gives it quite a bit of character, you know, gives it an impression of age and everything. But because I've been neglecting my trees, what I've attempted to do this year is I did some spring pruning in places to try and encourage some multiple buds and thicken these pads up, because they've got a bit wispy, quite honestly. But when you do that to a neglected tree that's also just been repotted after a very long wait, you can't go mad and prune back all of the growth tips, because you'll just stop the sap rising, because there'd be nowhere for it to go and you can get dieback. So I've done it in places, leaving some growing tips to extend this year and pull the sap through out the tree and try and get it to balance. Those extensions will come off in the autumn and they'll form little buds through the winter. Hopefully buds with an S, not bud singular. So I am trying to thicken this tree up. So the lower branches didn't get hacked too much. You can see this year's extensions are reasonable. A lot of these older needles at the base of the shoots will actually fall this year. But I trimmed a couple. You can see that's split, there's some splits here. So the thickening process on the lower branch, which I've split, basically it is a single branch, but once this lower branch thickens up here, these bits sticking up at the back will come off, leaving a nice front pad towards the front of the tree. And when this one thickens up, these bits sticking out over the top of this one can go back, and that should form a nice second pad. And although it's a single branch, it'll give the impression of two, which brings the balance of the tree nicely down. That's the idea. This is a plan, don't forget. Still in action here. Now up in the apex of the tree, where obviously the sap tries to rise, I could do a bit more heavy pruning here, and we have got some pretty good multiple buds on some of these tips now. So many in places I might even have to thin them, because the idea is to get where there was one, try and get two or three. Yeah, and that thickens the look of the pads. So it's a work in progress after a long period of neglect. See, now this is quite a weak area of the tree, so I took a couple back, and we've got some nice, I mean that's about the best back budding I've seen on this tree. 4 buds on a single shoot, and signs of another one pushing there where my middle finger is. But I left some to pull the sap through that part of the tree. Otherwise these could have died back completely, but the sap's pulling through okay. Same round here, you know, this is a bit thin and wispy in this area, so I didn't go mad, but I have got some back budding. So it's a work in progress. Back budding that I've achieved so far will thicken up some of the branches and the pads. The extensions like this will come off in the autumn, and the little buds will appear through the winter, and there'll be nice new shoots next spring. So it's a work in progress. Starting this year, I can see some wildlife crawling around in there. I've only brought these indoors to film. Obviously all my bonsai are outdoor trees. They will not live indoors. And this is a native species, Scots pine, found all over the country. Likes acidic type soil, often found on heathland and, you know, things like that. But yeah, this one's coming on. I'm pleased with what it's done this year after a repot and a little excessive pruning, shall we say. I pushed my luck. But autumn prune on some of the extensions, and next spring a tidy up. And by the end of next year, I think I'll have brought this tree back to its original shape, because it's certainly got out of shape. So that's that one, Scots pine. Now this little Japanese larch is in trouble. It was left in a tiny pot far too long, so its root system just wasn't good when I repotted it. And obviously when you repot, you always do a bit of damage to the roots, and it's objected. So this year it's not growing well at all, and due to the harsh winter, or parts of the harsh winter, cold and wet doesn't do trees any good, quite honestly, especially when they're in small pots. I lost a couple of branches during the winter, and they were structural branches. Now a couple are recovering. This lower branch here is extending well. I'm not going to trim it. I need to get as much sap flowing back through this tree as I possibly can, and the fact that it's flowing on the lower branch is quite good, balanced by the fact I've got good extensions on the apex as well. But this branch was in a poor state. This bit's lost, but this bit's recovered. The sap's managed to get in there and push some new growths out, so that will even that little branch out now. Couple of extensions to make sure everything's coming through. This branch I'm happy with. That can have a little trim, probably beginning of next year or end of this year. This branch is struggling. It's lost the back part of it, but it has an extension at the front, so it's still got chance this year to push out a few more little shoots, which it needs to do. This is a lower branch. This lower branch I'm not sure is going to make it. It's got so little greenery on it, and there's no sign of life at the end. If I cut it back to there, it will regrow, but you're looking at a couple of years to get it back to the right size to balance the tree. This one round the back is at least alive. Let me just twist this a minute. Now these two branches that were quite important to the tree were lost in the winter. And to get a pair like that is a right pain, because I'm going to have to restructure the tree, which will take a couple of years. But the idea is, looking through, those two are going to leave a gap. So what I've got to do with the two below is allow them to climb a little bit. So instead of making all of the growths come out sideways to make a nice pad like that one, I'm going to have to let them grow a bit taller and then out. So sort of try and lift these two branches to cover that gap. Now the next lot of branches, you'll have to excuse the yellow tips. We've had a couple of heat waves, and with a not too good root system, I just haven't been able to get enough water into it. It's as simple as that. But by the end of the year, the root system will have recovered, so next year's growth will be vigorous, because it won't get disturbed, obviously. So that's what the yellow tips are. It's not an early autumn, it's lack of hydration and overheating, basically. I could have put it in the shade, I suppose, but you know. But yeah, so I mean there's life in this branch, and given the idea of getting the triangular overall shape, these two branches are okay size-wise. This one's okay size-wise, this one needs to grow a bit. And then in the apex, I'm really not fussed what happens up there, because I could cut that off and it will regrow. But anyway, it's got some extensions. That's the state of play at the moment. Not good. A bit of singeing due to the heat waves and not a good root system. Virtually all recoverable during the rest of this year and next year. This bit I'm pleased about, because that rebalances that lower branch, the fact that that little bit's there. Otherwise it was a bit lopsided. But it's coming on, little Japanese larch. Now this is a little Japanese elm, Zelkova, which I am about to sell. I'm just lazy and haven't actually got round to it. Hang on, let me just twist the screen around. I can't see what the hell I'm filming here. Duh. Yeah, that's about right. So this is a little twin trunk, yeah? Separates out here. And to get the best effect of a bonsai twin trunk, you need a gap between them. So I'm just going to give this a very quick tidy up, because as I said, I am selling it. Quite honestly, it's a deciduous tree, and you can see the branch structure really well in the winter. But I would never buy a deciduous tree in the winter with no leaves on, because it's very difficult to tell whether it's actually alive or dead. Whereas if I sell it now in full leaf, you know, anybody who wants to do some extra pruning or shaping, that's up to them, or they can leave it till next year. But the trouble with this plant as a bonsai is it does these really large extensions with big gaps between the leaves, which is not the bonsai way. So I'm just going to take a few of these off. I just want this to look a bit tidier to get some photos to sell. And the main thing to tidy is the gap up between the trunks. These things shoot out all over the place. They are so vigorous. But I want that gap between the trunk to be visible. Otherwise it's difficult to say. It's a twin trunk, isn't it? And a lot of these long extensions just at the moment should have been done about a month ago and didn't get done. I'm not taking too much off. I'm just getting a little bit of shape to it. Just ready for a couple of pictures. I'm going to leave some greenery between the two trunks, but I still want to be able to see that gap. Say these, if these are watered and fed well, they can grow 2 or 3 foot in a year. So they're quite easy bonsais to deal with, on the grounds that, you know, if you make a mistake, well, it'll grow again very quickly. Yeah, I think that'll do. As I said, I'm not keeping it. It's not for me, and it would be wrong for me to decide how to shape it when it's not going to be my plant, is it? You know, that's for somebody else to decide what they want to do with it. Anything from lots to next to nothing. Okay, that's all I'm going to do. I think, yeah. That should have been repotted in the spring and didn't get done. It got forgotten, and eventually the leaves had opened up too much to risk taking out of its pot. And the ideal time to repot a deciduous tree in the bonsai world is just as the buds start to swell. Because literally all the stored sap that deciduous trees take in their chlorophyll and everything else and take it back to the base of the tree for the winter, for the hard times. Come the spring, all those sugars and things like that push up through the tree and make the buds swell. And at that point the roots aren't doing too much, so it's a good time to allow them to get disturbed. I think that's about all I want to do. This apex is far too thick. Just take a bit off. As I said, I don't want to go mad. It's up to somebody else to have a go at this. Right, let's just get the camera down and have a quick look up through the gap. Okay, so you can see I've opened up the gap now, so it's obviously now a twin trunk. So a couple of minutes on that has just given it a little bit of shape. So it does now look a bit more like a bonsai rather than a bush in a pot. You can get too much foliage on deciduous trees. You need some gaps, you know. So yeah, I'll take a couple of pictures of that and that can go on eBay. Anybody who sees this video who wants it, that lives relatively close to Christchurch, Bournemouth area, it'll be on eBay. But if you send me a personal message, maybe we can have a deal. I mean, I'd be willing, I'm not posting it, mind, I'm not posting a tree. But I would be willing to deliver at cost, you know, pay for me petrol as well as paying for the tree, obviously. But yeah, so that's that one done. Okay, another native tree. This is probably one of my older trees. I have no idea how old, but I mean I've had it some time, I suppose 10 years, something like that, at which time the trunk has thickened out well at the base. It's actually got a good taper on it, it's got some form to the trunk, not dead straight and bolt upright, and this was quite heavily pruned in places in the spring. You can always check back for these videos if you want to find them. And well, basically it was repotted, pruned hard in places, and other places I had to go really careful because I'd had some dieback and I wanted to try and induce some budding. Well, that worked, didn't it? Look at it. This is a vigorous tree. They're also a little bit awkward for bonsai because they have a tendency to grow big leaves, and obviously it would look better with smaller leaves. But my idea in the spring was to see where I could push some growth out in the parts that had died back. And in actual fact, it's pushed out everywhere. I don't know why I worried, really. Okay, I'm not going to try and film pruning this one. The tree's too big, and I'll just do it and then we'll come back to it. But I mean, you can take a look at it now. I mean, you know, that's this year's growth. That's a foot of growth. And it can do better than that. We're only halfway through the growing season. But as a summer prune, I want to take these really long extensions off, and anything that was left to produce buds that's pointing in the wrong direction, either sticking up or sticking backwards or anything like that. So it's just a tidy up trim, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, that's just a quick summer trim just to open the tree up a bit, and by letting a bit excuse me, a bit more light into some of the lower branches by taking the overhanging extensions from above off, that will induce buds. There's still plenty of time this year for this to grow quite a bit more. In the future, I wish to develop this branch out into this gap. Now that's probably next year's job, but at least it's growing, because that looked dead in the spring, but it has shot out, just pushed it back a bit, and hopefully this will extend into this gap. My main worry with this tree is this gap here, but there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, hornbeams do shoot out from the trunk. I've taken 2 or 3 off. Look, you can see there's a little one there. They just grow out the trunk. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if one would just sprout there? But, you know, you can live in hope. Most of those tree growths just get taken straight off at the trunk, because most of the structure on this tree is sort of there. But what it needs to do is really thicken these lower branches up. You know, these lower branches need to be about 9 inches to a foot, you know, with arching down extensions to give it its look, to make it look more like a mature tree. What's going on in the apex at the moment, I don't care, because as I said, I could cut that off and it will grow again. So yeah, just a quick summer trim to let some light in and just keep a little bit of the shape for this year, but its main shaping will be next year. Having repotted it in the spring, by the time we get into next spring, we'll have a nice vigorous root system to really push this tree out all over the place. Then I can choose my branches. But at least we got it to grow. I really expected this one to do okay. It's always been a vigorous tree. So that's an English hornbeam. Well, this is my oldest tree. This is Japanese maple, Acer palmatum, and it's the variety Deshojo, which has naturally small leaves. If you want to keep them small, go round every couple of weeks and take 10 big leaves off. And then gradually it will bud where the leaves have come off, and you gradually encourage the tree to always produce small leaves. Loads of dieback in the winter, and I missed my chance to repot this, which is not doing the tree any good at all. It's been in that pot about 7 years now, so there's no goodness or anything left in that media that's any good to that tree at all. But I missed my chance, literally concentrating on other things, being away for a bit, and at the point I got to repot it, the leaves were open. I'd missed it. And as it was quite a weak tree, I thought, no, it's going to have to wait till next spring now, but I will not miss my chance next year. Now, we do have some of what I wanted, which is budding in places, relatively weak, but nonetheless there is some. You know, even on like a bare branch like that I thought I was going to lose, there are signs of some little shoots. So the tree is thickening up to the point where I can be able to choose and rub some out. You know, like a branch like this, all the leaf structure is on the end of the branch, leaving nothing. So I've now got some new shoots farther back, and branches that I thought I'd lost have actually pushed out some side shoots. Now this side of the tree is stronger than the other side, but you know, I left some bits on that were pretty obviously dead, but I thought, well, you know, they're not hurting. Let's give the tree a chance and find out where the life is. So I left branches on like this one, just in the hope it might shoot out, but that's dead as a doornail. If you want to find out if the branch is dead, break it. If it snaps and it's white inside, it's dead. It's got some green, there may be some life in it. But this is probably a 2 to 3 year project to get this tree back to how good it once was. And quite honestly, I'm a bit ashamed that I've let this tree go this far downhill and need to put an amount of effort in to bring it back. I will keep this tree sheltered this winter so that it doesn't get absolutely soaking wet in the rain. And what does the damage in the English winters is not so much the wet, it's the wet and the cold combined. Because you get a load of rain and then you suddenly get a cold snap. So your pot is absolutely dripping wet and then it freezes. And because it's in a pot, there's nowhere for that water to go. And when water freezes, it expands and it just crushes the root system. So I'm going to try and keep it just off, you know, just frost free and out of the rain, because it's not a strong tree. But we do have, you know, some good life. I'm not touching this, I'm not pruning it. It was just basically to get it on film. I've got it on film at the beginning of the year. I've now got it on film now. I can get it on film in the autumn when it's finished growing, and also to show the rather wonderful autumn colours that this one has. Some of the best coloured leaves when they're new. It gets a bit wishy-washy in the summer because instead of being bright red, they start to turn green, and you get combinations of the original sort of nice red colours and this sort of more washed out colour. But then the whole lot will turn in the autumn. And maples autumns are early, as are their bud burst in the spring. So that's that one. Alright, this is another Japanese maple, but an unnamed variety, so I don't know what it is. Under normal conditions it has quite naturally small leaves, and it does have lovely autumn colour and some nice fresh coloured leaves in the spring. I've left this one a month too late. Deliberately. They say with maples, prune in June if you want a mass of buds. Well, I've left it to the middle of July because I don't want a mass of buds at this time of year. I just wanted this tree to get a little bit of shape in it this year, and then I'll work on it next year. So this, you know, got neglected. I've recovered it a bit. I don't want to go mad this year. But take a good look at those 1'6", 2 foot long things, because the next time you see it, they'll be gone. They're all coming off. Okay, there we go. Quick summer tidy up. When you get those huge long extensions on maples like this, in bonsai terms, they are of no use whatsoever. The gaps between the nodes are far too big to be of any use at all. The only reason for leaving a shoot like that on a maple is it's called a sacrifice branch basically. You let it grow to thicken up what's behind it because it will draw the sap. So for instance, if this was a particularly weak branch, being its major branch, its first structural branch, if that was really, really weak, I could pick on a shoot about halfway there and let it grow. And I could let it grow 4 foot long. It doesn't matter because it will be cut off. But what that will do is pull all the sap into that, and because of the weight of this big long thing that it's trying to grow, it will thicken up the branch. So it's a useful tool to thicken up bits of the tree that don't balance properly. As far as the structure of this tree is concerned, I've got to keep this branch short because it's called a poke in the eye branch. It's sticking directly forward, which is not ideal. But the branch structure on this is far from perfect. I do have a good first branch and a reasonable second branch, but the third branch should be round the back. I don't know whether it'll actually work the other way round. I suppose it's worth a try. Could I work it that way round? Yeah, I could do. I could do it. I mean, that looks wrong now because all the leaves are pointing away from us, so it looks like it's all got really thin. But once these pads develop into lovely layers, the maple look, you know, these two are the main structural branches, followed by this one, and then that one, and then we're into the apex. And I haven't chosen my branches up there yet. I haven't made my mind up, but at some point I will choose 2 or 3 branches up there. But this one pointing out backwards is not as bad as it looks. I'm just trying to imagine what that branch will look like when it forms a layer around the back of the tree. It might actually work, but I don't need to make that decision now. I'm just pleased that that branch actually exists, even though it's weak. So that's that one. True structure of this tree, not determined yet, but I have a basic structure of branches which I can work with. Right, so this is the last of the maples, again an unnamed variety. It's grown well since the spring. You know, I carefully pruned it to try and lead the tree the way I wanted it to grow, and it's responded quite well. The problem I've got with this second structural branch is it's a bit up. Now, the idea is now to take everything that's sticking up off and force the new growth lower down, so that it becomes not quite so far away as this one. And this one, I'm not going to hack too much. There's loads of new growth along the branch. That's going to be a nice thick branch next year. But things like this have got to come off, yeah. So I'll thin out the apex. The apex on this tree has already formed some reasonable sized branches, but I've got a bit missing. I need a back branch around this area, and this good little tree is obliged. It's actually pushed a little shoot out there. Now yes, that's tiny, and that's 4 or 5 years away from looking like a proper branch, but at least there's one there to work with that wasn't there before. So I'll give this a quick hack, and as I say, it's only a summer trim. I'm not trying to style a bonsai. I'm just keeping it in shape and stopping it doing this, because those branches serve no purpose apart from helping to thicken up the whole tree below it. They do that, but I don't want them left on there. By taking them off now, the tree will respond with some new growths farther back in the tree, obviously, because they won't have anywhere to be, because those long bits will have been ceremoniously taken off. So I'll be back in a bit. Okay, that's all I'm doing on that one for now. I've just basically taken everything that was sticking upwards in the main off of that, and luckily that's actually opened up areas where there are some new little growths. Well, that's let the light in, they'll now grow. And it's the same with this. I've taken some of the sticky up bits off and some of the extensions, leaving these growths down here to get a lot more light. And there should be enough time this year for those to push on good enough and strong enough to survive the winter. Now, winter this year, I'm going to treat my bonsai properly. I mean, they're getting a balanced feed at the moment that's got a fair bit of nitrogen in it, when I remember, because they don't get fed every time. But later in the year, I will switch to a low nitrogen or zero nitrogen feed, and it helps harden the trees off ready for the winter. It just hardens up the tree and makes it more liable to survive many more branches, especially the younger, newer ones, the thinner ones. They're the ones that usually die back. So basically a high potash, low or zero nitrogen feed for the last month or so as it goes into autumn, and then the leaves drop. There's not a lot of point in feeding it then, is there? So that's the plan this year, is to harden them up a bit for the winter. As I say, they've been neglected for 3 or 4 years, these trees. I'm just starting to get back into the bonsai now. So that's that one done. Well, this last one is an English beech, and it's not doing very well. and the reason for that is in the heat wave that we had last year, I didn't realise at the time, because the bonsai were a bit neglected, and the best I could do was throw water at them as often as I could to try and get them through that heat wave. And what I didn't realise with this one was the moss had grown so thick and so dense that the water really wasn't getting down in the pot. It was running off in the main. You know, even though I went back to it and watered it again a while later, which is the idea, that, you know, sort of soaks down in, then put some more in, soaks down in sort of thing. You're supposed to water them until it pours out the bottom. And it didn't get done, and as a consequence I think it lost quite a few of its roots. So it started this year with a poor root system. So first of all, I'm pleased it's actually growing, because I was, you know, worried I'd lose the whole tree and it just wouldn't survive. But it's pulled through, and you know, the shoots that it had have opened and have got some green leaves, so it can photosynthesize, feed itself, and it does get watered and fed properly at the base this time. So sometime during this year it should have recovered its root system such that I can risk repotting it next spring before the buds break, and then we'll work on it from there. I don't plan on doing a lot with the actual structure of the tree, just to get the branches bigger, you know, far more branches on the branches and thicken it up a bit. But quite a long-term project on a beech. They're flipping slow growers. You know, they only seem to have one flush of growth a year when the buds open, and then you get some extensions and everything, and then that's your lot. You don't seem to get any more throughout the rest of the year. So all you've got to work with is that initial flush, you know, and you can make branches branch by taking the growing bud off and forcing the others to produce a branch. But it didn't get done this year. I just didn't want it to do anything but stay alive, which it's done. So we can do a bit more work on that next year. A little English beech.